Oh, it's Pepper.
Oh, cool. Okay, it should be streaming. Oh, there we go. Now we're live.
Yep,
Okay.
I love it.
Okay, so just make sure that's muted and we'll jump over to here. Hey, there we go. So
Yes,
apparently things changed without anyone telling us. So
yes,
now we're
yeah.
actually back. So we'll do this. All right, here we are.
Yes, despite technology not wanting us to be here, we are here.
We are here. Dang technology. So, yeah, so you just got back from a big show.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I guess we'll get into it for the topic later, but there's a thing called the LA Photo Works, where people pay like a pretty ridiculous amount of money to kind of meet with one on one with a bunch of art directors from all across the world, and like have their work reviewed and then potentially make some contacts for work. And for some reason, they included me in the group along with some other stuff, other people, and it was pretty fascinating. So we'll have to get kind of in depth, I think, for the topic if you're down.
I'm down. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's
Cool.
get through the art check, and then we'll
Yes.
spend a few minutes on that. So, what have you done in the last 48 hours?
All right. So 48 hours. Other than that, critiquing a bunch of people's work, I got basically two more panels inked. And so I'm not quite where I was hoping to be. I was hoping to have the entire page done. But today was relatively exhausting and kind of complicated. And so that's my excuse for coming short. But I came short. So hopefully tonight, I'd definitely like to at least catch up to where I wanted to be at that like finishing page thing. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. What about you?
I got the tiniest bit of sketching done, and then I wrote the video script for the anthology um, Kickstarter, and I've been starting storyboards on that. So a lot of stuff I can't show, and basic sketches. So not nearly as much as I wanted to, but making progress in a bunch of stuff, and then there's just lots of randomness happening. So
Yeah, yeah, and you guys just started up again too, so there's all that
yeah,
beginning of the semester
yeah, and
busy.
my schedule changed a little bit so that now, like I'm teaching past on Tuesdays. I'm teaching past 5 p.m., which
Okay,
didn't seem like that big of a deal, but like it just shifted everything in the evening back just a little bit, which had this domino effect. And so I've got to kind of readjust my Tuesday evening expectations. So
wow.
yeah. So how about challenges?
Yeah, so just overcoming some pretty big obstacles. Had some pretty big wins at my my day job recently for like big clients coming through that were kind of up in the air, and that's always good news in my position. If you're closing accounts and making money with your art, that's a good thing. That's a good place to be as an art director, and that's makes me super proud of my team. But then, like, on personal work, just that juggle of, like, I'm hoping to kind of rebrand and update my branding and stuff like that, and that's been complicated. I mentioned this the last time. I'm sure this will be a struggle till I'm done with, figuring out what I'm going to do for the website and stuff. Although I am starting to lean towards Squarespace, so maybe we'll have a lot of Squarespace content in the near future. But I'm still kind of torn on the WordPress thing, and actually I'd like to throw that out to the listeners as just a question. For web comics, have you guys heard of anything that works well with Squarespace for web comics in particular? Because that's one of my concerns is like the two sites I host. So I'd love to hear that, kind of source that out to the community, and Corey's going to help me troubleshoot with that too. But it's just a really good question. Like, hey, if somebody out there already knows a good cheat that kind of mimics or comes close to what Comic Press does, that would be really cool to know. So
I bet the blog functionality will do it in Squarespace.
I would guess that's probably the best workaround. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you
So
never know. Maybe there's already a template,
yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. Um, yeah. So challenges for me, I don't know, I don't know how to describe it, but still just struggling with just death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, there's just a billion tiny things, none of them even
Yeah.
significant enough to mention. My fish tank is back up and running. We had to kind of run. The nearest fish store is like 30 miles down the road, so that's a bit of a hike to get down there and get some supplies. And anyway, just a bunch of that stuff, and then just school and work and taxes and filling out forms. And I spent
Oh, that's
like
right. 'Cause of the delay. That makes a lot of sense. So you're having to deal with that late.
yeah, and it's like and on top of that, I just got back from a trip, and I had to spend like 3 hours creating an expense report because the new financial system does stuff. And so then there were things that I didn't get to do during that time that I had to do later, and just normal stuff, but nothing like, I don't know. It all just seems like I should be getting more done than I'm getting done, because
Yeah.
I can't point to like an event or a major challenge. It's
Yeah.
just normal, basic little stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely feel you on that. I feel like I'm falling a little short on what I could do right now.
Yeah.
And it is just a lot of like little things, just juggling. Like it's just the act of juggling, I think, at some points. But I guess the goal for both of us should be just let's try to maintain momentum
Right.
on the personal work, because once again, I think we've both you know been at this long enough to know that's the stuff that leads to the fun stuff.
Right.
So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
So
but I relate.
yeah. How about plans?
So yeah, so I definitely want to be finished with this page. So there's a couple things I need to do that. So I need to finish the last panel, and then I need to spot the blacks, like kind of do one more pass over the large areas of black on the page. And there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, one is so that I can kind of sell originals when they're finished,
Yeah.
if I ever decide to do so, like so they'll look really good. And the second reason, and this is a little Photoshop tip for anybody out there, but it's easier to manipulate a great photo to be a better photo than it is to take a crap photo and try to make it look like a good photo. So it's very similar with inks. Like it's much easier to clean up really clean, beautifully executed inks than it is to try to kind of clean up and fix up crappy inks. And basically, like the whole "let's fix it in post" thing is something most people say when they first start directing or first start doing. Um, Getting it right at first and then polishing it in post, that's the ideal.
Yeah.
So like to me, that's the reason for that. Sorry, that was a long rant, but I just realized it's actually something. It took me like especially when I was a new artist and I first started getting into digital, I was a lot sloppier, assuming that like the computer would just make everything better, and that's something I had to learn the hard way is not the case.
Right. Yeah, and yeah. We should write that down as a topic, the whole
Yeah,
garbage in, garbage out thing.
I love it.
Um, okay, so plans for me. I am going to finish this illustration. I will produce a storyboard and asset list for the team of people working on the Kickstarter video. And I'm going to do a couple test animations because I'm going to take pages from people's anthology stories and cut out specific things and make them move a little bit, just so we've got a little bit of that stuff. And then I'm going to mock up the book and see if I can do some fly arounds on a 3D mock-up.
Wow.
I don't know if I'm going to do all of that in the next 2 days, but that's kind of my punch list for knocking. I don't know how long, but shortly.
Wow. You're a gentleman and a scholar for even volunteering to do that. Because that's an epic undertaking, but I think it's well worth it. That book's going to be awesome.
Yeah,
So
and I don't
you're
know.
also the right guy for that at the helm, honestly. Like that's I know I just know for a fact it's gonna look cool.
I'll
So
tell you the problem with the script that I came up with is instead of going, okay, what's the most utilitarian script I could come up with, I was like, all right, I'm gonna get on my bike and I'm gonna ride around. So I rode around town on my motorcycle for a while, and then after I was kind of feeling it, I stopped and I got some frozen yogurt and I wrote a fairly complicated script. So we're actually gonna have. I'm gonna try to have all 30-ish creators on camera, which
oh
will
wow.
be quite a bit of editing and organizing. But I think it's going to be really cool because I think the power of that book is going to be in the fact that there's just so many awesome people involved in it, and like just
Yeah.
the gravity of like, wow, that is a lot of artists. I think
Yeah.
I think is going to be cool, and I really want to sell that. So I'm not going to give away how that's going to happen on the air, but if you're involved in the anthology, you will find out soon. So
I love it. That's exciting too, and I think that's a smart strategy because it humanizes it, which I don't see often with pitches for anthologies, like especially with video. So I think
yeah,
that's man, really you'd almost think you were like a communications major or something.
yeah, it's almost like I'm a professional communicator of some kind or another.
That's a really good strategy though. I can already kind of envision. I was kind of thinking you were gonna say like I was gonna do something unconventional like footage of me riding on a bike and getting frozen yogurt and saying by the anthology.
That would have been done already. That would have been great. No, this is gonna take some hours, but it'll be cool and it'll stretch me a little bit as well, which is gonna be fun. So,
I love it.
and people have volunteered to help, so that'll be good.
Sweet.
So if you're watching this and you want to help, we probably have some work that you can do. So anyway,
Good.
yeah. All right, should we jump into the topic?
Yeah. I'll try to be short with the description and stuff. It was just an interesting event. So, um, today's topic is LA Photo Works. So it was about 2 months ago. I got invited out of the blue by the organizer of this thing called NYC Photo Works, and now LA Photo Works. I guess they do one in LA, but it's primarily based usually in New York, and I think the LA one's a newer thing. And the idea behind it is the organizer kind of reaches out to different art directors all across the US and tries to get them to come to this event and review people's portfolios. The people pay like a certain fee to like sit at a table, and they're like they pay like on a scale based on how many kind of one-on-one meets they get. They get about 20 minutes with the art director reviewing their portfolio, exchanging contact info. Both people get to kind of try to offer value for value. And then, like, the organizer kind of rings a bell, everybody swaps tables to their next appointment. And it's like speed dating for primarily photographers, but illustrators as well, which I think is why I was invited because they're starting to branch into illustration. So I agreed just because it sounded fascinating, and I mean, it's like they offered free food, and basically, like I'm always kind of on the lookout for different freelance possibilities. Like it always doesn't hurt to have like a nice roster to turn to when you're in a rush season or you have need for it. So
And and
I
and I think
agreed.
one of the things that I think is going to be cool is what you're about to tell us is
Yeah,
not a typical experience of going to a convention or a conference, because you're going to talk about it from not from like, hey, I attended a conference, but actually from
yeah,
kind of more behind the scenes, like here's what it's like to be an art director giving critiques.
Yeah,
which is
so
kind of
it
a
was
fascinating insight.
yeah, and it's definitely unique for me too. I haven't done a lot of these. I've done a few reviews like at visits for college campuses, where I'll go to like a college and kind of try to recruit from there. Um, but this was definitely a unique experience, and I think was probably very beneficial. I asked everyone who got to my table like how they felt the event was going for them, and most of them stated that it was really worthwhile. They had made some valuable contacts, but for me, it was really weird. First off, just going to it because I saw the list of people, and I'll just kind of I'm just going to read off like a few of these, not to name drop, just to kind of explain where my imposter syndrome just kind of kicked into overdrive. Um, so like the head of content for Apple, the let's see, Belair Bond, Concord Music. Um, there's some really big ones like Deutsch, Disney's project manager, Eclipse, 8060 South, Entertainment Weekly's photo director, like Fox Film, TV, and Sports art director, Saatchi and Saatchi, their art director, and like just a bunch of like really heavy hitters, like design firms that have just won like the top awards. And here I am, like the art director for a company I'm very proud of, but has somehow kind of gotten on the radar of this list, which is partially another reason I agreed, because it's kind of it just felt like an honor to kind of be able to kind of sit as a peer next to these people that frankly I don't feel worthy to sit next to. But the funny thing is going there, if you want to feel imposter syndrome, have somebody ask for a portfolio review after they just got reviewed by the art director at Saatchi and Saatchi, and
Right.
you're like, and they're like, what does your company do? And they're like, no, we're not Saatchi and Saatchi, sorry. No. um, but it was really fascinating. It was cool. And there was a lot of really heavy talent. But what's interesting is, um, the thing that I would say, and I've mentioned this before about like hiring, and it's something that's really good for I think somebody approaching this scenario from like the standpoint of not being an art director, just coming like paying the fee to kind of meet one on one with these people. I had one negative experience that entire day,
Mm.
and it was a person who like when they saw for like 2 seconds that they couldn't get anything out of me, uh, just shut down and were super rude. And I was like, oh, that attitude is going to get you absolutely nowhere.
Did you tell him?
Because,
Did you tell him that?
oh, yeah, yeah.
That's awesome.
Because the thing is, no one worth their salt wants to work with a prima donna.
Oh yeah.
Like, they want to work with people who know they're good, people who have laurels and are aware of their accomplishments and even pride in their work. But literally, if you do that higher than thou kind of nonsense, like at a job interview or at a portfolio review, that's noted. And then another thing to just keep in mind is that those art directors like then go to lunch and talk,
Yeah.
right? So like you don't want to be a dick. Like it's just a really good advice is don't be a jerk. Um,
Well,
and
and who knows where people are going to be next month or in 2 years, or
yeah.
or who knows who's friends with who, or I mean, like,
Oh,
and
exactly.
and it's a really weird thing to think like, if you only there's a good phrase like the measure of a person, is how they treat someone that can do nothing for them. And
Yeah.
if you only look transactionally at human beings,
Yeah.
um, you are going to massively fail. Like, massively fail. There are very few situations, where you're going to make it that way, especially in industries that are highly competitive and small,
Yeah.
like illustration and photography and art and things like that. Like, everybody starts to kind of know each other. And if you go down the road of like, what can I squeeze out of each interaction that I have, rather than like treating people like people, that is not going to fly.
Well, and there's one thing I'll say is like this person right off the bat just emanated that. Like and so like most people I met emanated just an interest in connecting and doing good work and like discovery.
Yeah.
And that to me was really appealing to the extent where there were some freelancers that I may not ever get to use because like a lot of these people were photographers and we don't hire a lot of photographers. And the ones we do, it's usually product photography, but in this case, there were some that were so appealing as people that I was like, if an opportunity ever opens up for these people, I will definitely keep them in mind.
So what were
And
some of
so,
the attributes? What were some of the attributes of those people where you found them, appealing, or even though their work didn't match what you're looking for right now, you're going to keep them in their mind? What was it about them or their demeanor or their work that kind of stood out to you?
so I mean, first and foremost, it's like I like the work has to speak. So like if your work's terrible, like you could have the best personality in the world, and one thing that will bring out being a good person in that scenario and being like likable and approachable and like and sincerely interested, is that to me that's more of a scenario where I'm much more drawn to try to mentor that person, give them tips to kind of get better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the scenario where there's a strong portfolio and a person who's confident in their capabilities, but also humble enough to have an interest in like what kind of opportunities we would have to offer and stuff like that. Like, so it's a mutual exchange kind of scenario. That to me came across extremely well. And like I said, there literally every single person minus that one at that table, like that I met, and we went through a lot of people. It was a short round of doing this, but there were a lot of people I reviewed portfolios for, and those people were easily the easiest to work with. I'd also say some people who just showed social smarts about just kind of commenting about the environment and like their experience there, as opposed to just cutting straight to business.
Yeah.
Because once again, I think that part of doing business is a little bit of not small talk that's BS, but just human to human connection.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, if you're not having that, you might as well just cold call and send emails, like,
Yeah.
and don't go to an event like that. Because you'll get just as much progress. If you want your work to just speak for itself, just send your work, you know?
Did
Um,
anybody do their homework on you?
yeah. There was one person who was an illustrator who was there and might actually end up being used later on because they had stuff in their portfolio that was particularly relevant with a couple of clients that we work with. So, and once again, that person showed an interest, showed a knowledge of what we do, and had a portfolio that kind of fit what we're looking for. So that's the weird scenario. Is like I think a lot of people have this weird imaginary idea of what like an art director is looking for in an event, or like when they're getting mail or getting any sort of like reached out contact. And I think a lot of the time people don't realize like sincerely, if you can't fit the like there's certain jobs you need, and if the person doesn't just line up with that, it's not personal. It literally is just there's another person who does.
Yeah.
And so it's an odds game a lot of the time. And then the other thing to keep in mind with the odds game is if you have someone show interest in your stuff, definitely follow up because the goal of an art director, the majority of the time when they're out of an event like this, like part of why an art director would even agree to be at an event like this, right? It's a great way to check out work without being distracted by the giant inbox.
Yeah.
And the inbox is the nightmare of all art directors. Like you don't want to come back to like 800 emails that you have to review and sort out. And so another email added to that that's like kind of spammy and it's like, hey, look at my stuff. It's like, no, this is not the time and I don't need another thing on my plate, you know? Um, this kind of event is really nice for having that one-on-one interaction. So if that person does send an email, then there's like a connection like, oh, okay, I remember this person. Like I remember talking to them. And in those cases, if an art director tells you to follow up, follow up. Um, and don't be shy about it because the memory of like even if I'm completely moved by somebody's work and I really want to work with them, like 4 months from now, I might be juggling like fixing an error in production and like doing press checks for like color on some other item and then leading my own in-house team and stuff like that and completely forget that brilliant work that I saw that I wanted to work with. So it's
Right.
like, yeah, I would definitely say, I don't know if I gave too much of a window of like what the event was like, but the thing I felt out of it that I think was kind of interesting, and I think maybe more events like this should happen, was first off, it personalized the interaction. So you're able to see the person's there to walk you through their work and kind of explain their thinking and stuff like that.
So real quick, kind of paint a picture of what the environment is like. Are you, because when I
Yeah,
imagine speed dating, I imagine small tables, two chairs sitting across from each other. If I were a photographer or illustrator coming to this event, I walk in and what happens? Like,
that's
laid out for me.
that's actually a perfect description. So, it's an event. It's in I forget the place it was organized at.
Some convention hall or hotel or something.
It's a small room that's like an art space that they rented out, and it's literally just filled with tables. And then there's like a bunch of snacks and wine and like coffee and stuff like that. All the fuel that most art directors need in a little kitchen area that you can just kind of peruse. But it's exactly set up like a speed dating room. So it's like you have these little circular white tablecloth tables with two chairs right across from each other, and then you get 20 minutes, and then a guy stands up, rings a bell, you alternate to your next appointment, and it goes like that for the entire time.
Okay.
But the nice thing is like 20 minutes is a pretty good amount of time. It's also really good for an art director because if it's not really gonna, it very much like speed dating, if it's not gonna work out, like if you're not the right fit for our company, it's like it's silly to kind of waste time on it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some people, there were a few where it was like even just their pursuit and their interests didn't line up. So it's like there's no point in me kind of doing an overall critique when their work wasn't necessarily relevant to what we'd want, you know.
Right.
Um, and so in those cases, it's brief enough to where that's not super awkward, and then it's long enough to where if you really interact with somebody, you can get a sense of what they're about, or like reveal like a really bad personality trait, like the one I kind of mentioned.
Yeah.
So, um, but I do think it was so interesting because it was a lot different than events that I've gone to at schools where it's kind of like an auctioning block for a bunch of fresh graduates who are like, here's my portfolio. For one thing, it's an event that allows more professionals in the mix. So it's people who've like, they've stuck their stickers to the side of their plane. They've battled a little bit. So they got a bit of a client list. And then you have fresh talent as well. But it's more one-on-one than like a school event where you're kind of, most of the ones I've gone to at schools have like these booths set up and you kind of peruse the booth and you stop at the artists that draw your eye or interest, that might be appealing for your company. This kind of takes out even that possibility of like accidentally missing a booth, because these are people who are really sincerely interested in having your critique and your time. And so I think something about that, just having the one-on-one interaction, and it's a lot cheaper than having to fly to New York, hoping that an art director is like, hey, meet me in New York or in LA, for like a one-on-one for 2 hours. And then has to reschedule because of a press check or production error or some snafu that art directors have to deal with all the time. So it's nice for that too, because it's like you get to condense all those meetings into one. So I think it was really beneficial, and I was a little skeptical of it at first because I was like, I don't know if this is going to benefit the people attending, but coming out of it, I think it definitely did. Did that give kind of a picture of it? I hope so.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
was so you did these and then you guys went to lunch. What was lunch like with all these art directors?
So that's the weird thing. So we didn't actually go out to lunch. We just kind of, the lunch was at the facility. So
Okay.
people just
Yeah.
kind of wandered around the lunch table, and a lot of the art directors and creative directors just kind of did small talk about the event. But it was very short. So it's like, it felt very much like a speed dating thing where you're just like, you're kind of rushed through the whole process, and it's very overwhelming. Um, so there was a lot of just small talk, and most of the small talk was like about, potential leads that we found, and then, like I said, there were a couple bad actors there that got mentioned. That's one thing to also kind of keep in mind when you're vying for work. um, just think about the internet, right? Like if somebody dislikes a restaurant, or they like a restaurant, which of those two is going to leave a review on Yelp, right? So if that's the human condition, right, where you hate a restaurant and you're much more compelled to give feedback because you're like, I had a terrible experience and there was like a fly in my food and stuff like that. Think about that and then put that in an art director.
Right.
Like, and then put that at a convention where, like, anybody who's in charge of having to lead creatives, is going to be drawn to other people who have similar challenges, right? Just like we're all drawn in a community to people who make comics and make stuff because, like, that's our community. So they're going to complain about as particularly bad actors or people who are really rude, because it's like, it's human nature.
Yeah.
So do you want to give bullets to those people? Like, seriously, just be a good person, just be nice. like, um but, like, once again, so there were a couple prima donnas kind of mentioned in there, but other than that, like, it was a pretty good event. There wasn't as much kind of interacting and bonding with other directors as I would have liked. But it did fulfill the purpose, because the purpose was mainly for those people coming in to see if they can fill a need for your, work. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd like to see more of that kind of approach, though, to even conventions where it's a little more one-on-one, a little more organized, where you have like a much more kind of focused time with someone, and I think it's much more valuable for the artists because, like I said, um, if I go to like Adobe Max, I'm going to meet so many people. I'm going to have this giant bag full of swag and stuff. And, like, it's so overwhelming as an experience. It's not necessarily the best networking for jobs. It's good
Right.
networking for, like, for meeting peers and people you like and maybe getting inspiration. But I don't think it's as directly beneficial as something like that would be for especially for a freelancer. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, having been to Adobe Max several times and just coming back from Creative South, something that's smaller and more intimate like Creative South is way more beneficial on a relationship basis than something like Adobe Max, where, I mean, how many people attend that? Like, it's in the tens of thousands, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and whereas I think it was less than 1,000 at Creative South, and
Nice.
even at Creative South, um, you're in a big opera house and you're all watching the same stage. The networking kind of happens like where a group of you go to lunch, or
Yep.
you bump into people in a line, and you talk to each other. And it was really interesting because I had a very similar experience where every single person I talked to was awesome, really human, really
Yeah.
nice, except for one person who I was actually in a conversation with somebody else, and this person just sort of kind of butted in, hearing that I taught vector graphics, and started pitching me. Like I'm at like an event, like a party thing, and we're like hanging out, we're talking about not work stuff. Obviously, like kind of your side projects and your passions and likes and dislikes kind of come up, but like as soon as he heard that like keyword that triggered him into his sales pitch, then I had to sit there for 15 minutes and listen to him tell me about his product, while the guy that I was actually just speaking to and enjoying a conversation with, like moved on, and I was just like, well, that sucks. Like, and I still to this day am like, it's been a couple weeks and I'm still like annoyed at that dude. Like, just the lack of social awareness to understand that, like, jump into the conversation, but be part of the conversation. Don't like derail it for your own sales pitch. Was
Yeah.
like, you just don't fit into this environment because like nobody else was like that. And so yeah, it's always that weird negative interaction that's like, that's definitely the one I'm going to talk about, you know.
Yeah.
So
And something to keep in mind too is like that might be the business card you remember for the wrong reasons. And so like
right.
that's the thing. You don't want to end up being the business card that then when it's sent again, you're like, oh, not that mother. Like
Right.
like you don't want to be the person that brings like derogatory thoughts to the person when they get your stuff.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, like this is another thing to kind of mention too, because I've never been to like this particular type of event where it's like a speed dating round with art directors and freelancers. And the closest I've been to that, I've been on the other end. So it's very similar to like the experience of hiring people, which I had never really had a lot of experience with outside of being an art director. And what's fascinating that I've learned, the insight that I've gained from that, I think will make me a lot stronger if I ever have to interview or talk to an art director. Because one of the key things to remember is like they are equally motivated for your success
Right.
um, the second you sit there. So it's really your game to lose. When you approach an art director or like especially someone hiring or in a hiring type of situation like this thing where it's like, hey, we use freelancers, so it doesn't hurt to expand our pool. We I'm sincerely in there hoping to meet people that I can add to that pool that are going to
Mm-hmm.
have the skill set and the thing that we can use.
Yeah.
So I'm vying for you when you sit down at the table as much as you are. And I think most good art directors are like that. I would say there's probably some bad actors who are just in it for like the title and the bragging rights or whatever. Or maybe they're just they've won a ton of awards and let that go to their heads or something like that. Um, but I think in general, most people are sincerely in there to literally find people. They're not like out to get you. They're not like so. So I think I guess my reason for bringing that up is like if you approach it with more ease, realizing it very much like at a situation like Creative South where you'll have anxiety like approaching another artist because you're like, I don't want to be annoying and stuff like that. But then you got to realize, why are they at Creative South?
Yeah.
Like they're there to connect with people. And like and what do most people want when they go to an event? They want connection, they want a good experience. So like they're sincerely probably thinking the same thing, like, maybe I should pick up a convert. No, that would, so like you're actually kind of being the enabler in that situation of something that both people want. And so I think that's something I would definitely mention. Like at this event, when somebody came to the table and it wasn't something we could use, that wasn't anything I took joy in. It was just sincerely not stuff we could use.
Right.
And so I think that when you come at it from that level, when you sit down and you realize like this is a human being who has a job, who like needs to get stuff done on time for money, to provide for whatever they're doing, like in life outside of art, right? If you come at it from that standpoint, I think that you'll usually get like a much better interaction because, like, once again, they're equally invested, they're equally interested. If you're that person that fills that thing, it actually saves that person a ton of work. Like to me, going to an event like that, coming back with a contact, if I need a certain skill set and I have like that in my book, it's that just saved me a ton of research and work and potential fallout, right? Because that's always a worry too for an art director. Like if I hire this person to do this job, will they do this job?
Yeah.
Because if they don't, I'm the one who has to answer for it. And so like once again, if I know, okay, there's a person that I can hire to do a job and they'll do that job, like that just spares me all that headache and anxiety and worries. So like I said, I think that that's something I definitely keep in mind too.
So I was actually talking about this with a bunch of seniors in college about how companies by nature are risk adverse. And they're risk adverse because of a very natural phenomena, which is that people need to eat, right? And so there are very few people in a situation that are willing to risk all the time, right? Because they need to make sure that they're making good decisions so that they can keep their job, they can do the best job for the company, and they will take risks, but those are calculated and rare. And the more common thing is that they're going to go for the sure bet. And so my point was, if you are looking for a job, then, let's talk about those risks. And we listed a bunch of different risks. Now let's talk about how you can eliminate those risks in the mind of your potential art director, potential client, potential future employer. And so I'm curious as you bring this up from your perspective. There's a bunch of risks, and you mentioned one of them, like, will this person actually come through and be reliable and finish something on time?
Yeah.
Are they gonna deliver the quality that I'm seeing right now? Are they gonna do something insane and freak out, and I'm gonna have to, like, do something weird political to try to, like, mop it up or whatever?
Yeah.
What are some things that you can see in a quick interaction with somebody that help alleviate some of those concerns from an art director's standpoint?
Oh man, there's so many. Like in the context of something short like this with a freelancer that we'd mostly be utilizing out of house, right? I'm mainly looking at portfolio execution and then like personability and communication. So like if I ask a pretty obvious, easy to answer question and there's like a lot of confusion, like it's a bit of a red flag because it's like, well, how's this going to go when I'm on a deadline? I need stuff fast,
Yeah.
and I need someone who can interpret information very quickly, and ask a lot of questions. Like if I'm not being clear, that's another thing I love seeing in any context, like hiring or not. Someone who asks a lot of questions and the right questions. So like if I'm not specific enough, if they actually get in there and make me be specific.
Yeah.
Because I think that's great because if I'm under deadline and I'm fully communicating a project and I've missed a really vital piece of information, this person's going to ask me that information. So once again, that is alleviating risk.
Yeah.
I'd say like in a hiring context, like a giant one is somebody who's open and not defensive. Defensiveness is like it's a very quick turn off for an art director. Like if you're in a scenario where you're bringing portfolios for review and you start defending every decision you've made, you better have like a badass defense for what you're saying, because otherwise you're going to come across as just defensive.
Right.
Um, and so, like, once again, there's a difference between like let's say I just have bad ice. I look at a picture, and go, oh, that's a really weird looking apple, and you're like, oh no, that's actually a onion. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's defensiveness that makes sense. Um, but then if you drew an apple like an onion and you're saying it's an apple and I'm saying no, that kind of like looks like an onion. I don't know if that makes sense, but my point is there's a difference between kind of properly defending your work, um, or like just honestly most of the time just being really open and kind of like putting down the walls of like so I guess the best explanation for that short term would be vulnerability.
Yeah.
Somebody is willing to kind of be vulnerable, and by vulnerable I don't mean like weak and apologetic and like like not aware of what you've achieved as a professional or anything like that, because that's the kind of vulnerability you don't want to see
Right.
in anyone really. It's just like but the kind of vulnerability that's like able to take criticism, because once again, if I'm hiring someone If anyone's hiring an artist, there's going to be revisions.
Yeah.
Inevitably, there are going to be revisions. No
Yeah.
matter how good of an artist you are, there's going to be revisions. And if there's not, that's the rarity, not that's the exception, not the rule. So like once again, do I want to deal with someone who to get that revision is going to be a 20-minute conversation or 30 minutes of my day just back and forth just to get one thing changed? Or is it going to be someone who's really receptive, understands that we're just professionals and we need to get this done and go, okay, and ask the right questions to get it done right and do it? You know what I mean? So defensiveness is like one of the big ones that that I look for not being in someone. So sometimes when I'm reviewing a portfolio, I'll bring up a criticism that might be a little pointed, just to see the reaction.
Yeah.
So, and it's just a test because I'm like, look, if you can't take that, we're not we're not going to do well.
Yeah.
But I also tend to be very like I'm an easier crit than a lot of people because I spent 15 years freelancing. So I also really empathize with their position, you know, and I kind of know the hustle, I know the game. And so it's like I do try to like be very complimentary when I'm reviewing, especially a professional's portfolio. I mean, this is a person who's, you know, blood, sweat, and tears are going to this thing they're showing me, and I'm having to flip through it quickly. So I try to kind of honor it as much as possible, but still, yeah, that's a big one. And then I'd also just say like one, like bar none, it's always portfolio. So like, you know, if your portfolio's at all weak, that ties into what Cory's talking about with risk, right? Because if I see 10 out of 10 images, they're just great, they're perfect. And then I see an 11th that's like just a failure. Like, hey, what are my odds now?
Right.
Like I hire you, my odds are 1 out of 11 that you're gonna bomb. Are those good odds? Do I want to risk my career on a 1 out of 11 chance, or do I want to go with the person who just gave me 100%? I'm gonna go with the 100%. You
Yeah.
know, because it also shows me their capability to critique their own work.
Right.
You know, so like it's I mean it's a long, complicated thing, but it's not actually as complicated as people make it, I think.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of the, I don't know. I think a lot of what people are looking for when they're looking for like, you know, how to do well at a critique session or how to put together your portfolio or whatever. Um, a lot of it feels like, what's the trick? You know, they're looking for the shortcut, and there isn't one. You need to spend years working on your book and getting, you know, several really solid images, and you know, filtering out the stuff that's not great. That there's not a trick to that. You know, it's just, what do you want to do? Show that stuff. Show it really well. You know, do case studies about, you know, how people are using the things that you're doing. That's it. You know,
Yeah.
there's not like a, well, if you use 12 images at this size, then there's this thing that happens in people's brains that they automatically want to hire you, and that's the trick that no one knows. No, it's just like, show a lot of really good work. Don't show the
Yeah.
bad work. Keep improving and do that for several years, and then you'll be fine.
And preparation smart too. I mean, like there were a couple people who initially I was like, this may not be a good fit, and then they were like, well, I also have this other portfolio,
Yeah.
and that was a much better fit. So they had come equipped with like a few things to potentially cover ground, you know. And I think that's smart thinking, that I would implement if I were in their shoes too, where I'd be like, you know, I try to like have in my back pocket, like, you know, because a lot of my work that's personal work is all traditionally inked and stuff like that. I don't show like a ton of the vector art that I do daily, because I just don't frankly want to do that like outside of my job
Right.
unless it's something really fun. So like I would probably keep that in my back pocket depending on the scenario, you know. So I think that's something to think too. Is versatility is not bad. Although I have to say at this thing, the people who stood out the best were just complete masters. Where they'd just come, they'd show their portfolio, whether I needed them or not. I just was like, wow, like you know, much to say other than that's a beautiful composition. Like, cool. Like, this is amazing. How long have you been doing this? It's more of like, now let me just get to know who you are so I can learn more about this cool art I'm looking at, you
Yeah.
know? Because even if this won't work out as like a professional interaction where I'm hiring you, like you might be somebody I just want to like follow on Facebook because I like your stuff and like I want to see what you're doing because it's really beautiful, you know? Because that's another thing to keep in mind too, is like nobody goes into art. Well, most people don't go into art for money. And so even art directors, like most of them cut their teeth in this industry because they wanted to be around creating and making stuff. So like, keep that in mind too. Like if you go into an interaction like that, you know, even a hiring interaction, you may not walk away with a job, but you might walk away with a friend, which is actually like super important for jobs later on. Because
Yeah.
like once again, like 10 years ago, I wasn't an art director. I was a freelancer just hustling, trying to get work, you know? So like you know, and the first people I hired were friends, you know? So, and friends I knew could deliver because it's like, why wouldn't you? You
Yeah.
know, if they're professional and they can deliver, why would I like Cory was saying, like risk aversion, like why take the risk? Like I know it's a sure shot. Like if I have like Kevin knockout illustrations as opposed to somebody I don't know, you know,
Right.
and I know he delivers, so I'm like, why wouldn't I? Like that's an easy bet, you know. So or like once again, if I ever needed video stuff for my work that we can't do in house, I think Cory would be the first person I'd call because it's like I know Cory delivers, I know he's a perfectionist, I know it would come out good. So like once again, like you know, when you go into these interactions, if you're just going to get the immediate, like Cory and I have talked about, just that toxic kind of like, what can you do for me kind of thing,
Yeah.
um, you're missing the most valuable thing, which is like, I think Cory said this. What was it about marketing? You said like the best, and I'm sure you were quoting someone, but it was a great quote about like the best form of marketing is not who's helped you, but who you've helped.
Yeah.
Uh,
Networking is what you can do to help someone else.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's 100% true. So it's like I think you don't want to miss that kind of thing. Yeah. But
Yeah.
anyhow, totally rambling. But it
Cool.
was a cool experience. It was a really interesting experience. Definitely weird, definitely kind of surreal. I still feel that way. I constantly, and I would say I'm probably not alone in that room. I think most type A type people tend to feel like they're faking. And
Yeah.
so the whole time I was in that room, I was like, I'm not really an art director, right? And then I'm like, but then when people would come to my table and be like, well, you know, what does your company do? And I'm listing these clients that are like huge and they're all over the world. I'm like, oh, I guess, yeah, this is actually something I do. And it does
Right.
sound kind of cool, even though it's like, doesn't, you know, but the whole time I was like, but I'm right. Like, I don't deserve to be in this room with these other people on this side of the table. I've always been on that side, you know. It's a weird funny thing, and I don't know if that ever goes away, you know.
I have
um
no idea, but yeah, I feel that all the time. So
yeah, and that's one thing I will tell you, I don't think most people are judgmental of. Like most of the artists that I met had that struggle too, and they would say things that were just telltale signs they have imposter syndrome, where they're like, well,
right.
it's not that great kind of thing.
Yeah.
Some of that is pretty much forgiven by most creatives because it's like, once again, we empathize. It's like I know that feeling. Like I know that
Yeah.
feeling because we'll have it. So yeah, but that was definitely a weird, kind of surreal day, and I'm still trying to kick like the whole why was I invited to this thing kind of thing.
Yeah,
You know,
to everybody listening to this, it makes perfect sense why you're invited. Because I can clearly see why you're invited, but I also completely understand. Like if that were to happen to me, I'm sure that there are other people that look at what I've done in my life and where I'm at in my life and my accomplishments and would be like, well, yeah. But for me, it would be like, what the crap am I doing in this room? Like this has nothing
yeah,
to do. Yeah. And so I think that's a pretty normal, reaction. One that you've had with like the National Cartoonist Society. And
every
then
time.
every time you show up and you're like, man, I don't belong here. And then you talk to people and they listened to your podcast 10 years ago. And, there's, anyway. So yeah, so I understand. But I mean, what they say about imposter syndrome is interesting. And maybe we should talk more about this as another topic, because I've got to wrap this.
Yeah.
But is that people theorize that the majority of creatives experience some level of imposter syndrome most of the time. And so the irony of that situation is that we go into a room full of highly talented people as a highly talented person and feel like we're the only one faking it. The irony
Yeah.
is that everyone else also is feeling like they're the only one in the room faking it, and everybody else knows what they're talking about. And it's like a weird, it's a weird thing. Just numerically, it doesn't match up with the feeling, So
Yeah. And I think that also just has a little bit to do with, we'll touch on it more later, but I would definitely say for just kind of some of its maturity, because I think when you're young, um, at least a lot of younger creatives, like you're like overly confident, like you just, it's a very small pond, and so it's easier to be the big fish, or at least fool yourself to think you're the big fish. But then you get older, and it's like there's this ocean of just amazing talent out there. And I don't know if there's a point you can get at in the rung where you're going to be able to look at all the beautiful talent out there, like all the different, like good examples, like a national park. Like, I don't know, like the more national parks you go to in the US, the more you see there's like beauty everywhere. So it kind of like, it's not as easy as like the first time you go to a national park and you're like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. But once you've seen all the beauty out there, not all of it, but at least a taste of it, it starts expanding your viewpoint. And so you don't necessarily think maybe that one thing is the most beautiful. That
right,
like there's a variety of it, and each thing has its own thing. So like, you're in this massive ocean full of all this beauty, and it's very hard to like, and rarely do I meet like a good example is like, some of the members of the NCS have been nominated for Oscars, and yet I've had conversations with those people where they're literally geeking out about someone else being like, what was I doing in a room with that guy? And you're like, well, you were like up for an Oscar, so maybe that's why you were in, but
right,
when you've been nominated for an Oscar, so it's hard not to posit that's probably the same scenario if you get the Oscar. You're probably looking at other guys like, well, like let's say you're an actor and you're like, well, I got the Oscar, but I don't deserve to be like in this room with Jack Nicholson because that guy's a legend, and you're
right,
like, but you know what I
yeah,
mean? So I think like I really do. I like it's funny because that's one of those things. Maybe it's confirmation bias for me, but it's like that data that you're talking about seems to align with my own experience with other creatives and just as a creative myself, where it's like I don't know if there's ever really a point where we're gonna reach where you can just kind of look out and be like, I've done it. you
Well, and I
know?
and I think when you reach that point, we're getting onto a whole nother topic.
Yeah, yeah,
But when you reach that point, you're dead in the water.
yeah,
As soon as you realize as soon as you've deluded yourself into thinking that you've arrived, and that your artistic journey is complete, you stagnate. I want to point out something that Mike Emmerich said in the chat. He said that's something somewhat reassuring, but I feel like yeah, but that's true for those, quote, real creatives. So that logical thing that Cory just said doesn't really apply to me anyway. And which is more anecdotal data. And he's saying that jokingly, but also probably truthfully. But is that's more anecdotal data to say that somebody that is at Mike's level, and if you look at his work and his character development stuff like that, it's phenomenal work. Like it's really
yeah.
impressive, and
Thanks.
and he feels like that, and I feel like that, and you feel like that, and other people that are like way above us feel like that, and way below us feel like that. I think the point. This is a weird way to wrap this up. I'm going to wrap it up with this, but this is weird, right? The other day, I went down a rabbit hole and I was watching. I only made it halfway through because I couldn't stand it. I watched the first half of this flat Earth theory documentary
Oh, I've
about
this.
flat earthers, and I could only handle so much of it. But somebody pointed out that one of the problems that you have with confirmation bias is the relationship between the Dunning-Kruger effect and imposter syndrome. And so, on the one hand, you have the scientific community as a community of people who solve these problems. They are met with the scientific method, which is I have a new idea and everyone attacks it, right? Because that's the scientific method is let's prove it. Let's, and they go through and it gets attacked and it gets, until it really is solidly proved. And so as a scientist, what they're saying in this documentary is that imposter syndrome is rampant because you're constantly being challenged, like as a matter of procedure. And then on the flip side of things, when you take Dunning-Kruger into effect, if you haven't had a lifetime of scientific research and methodology and challenging, Dunning-Kruger has a scale. At the beginning of that scale, when you know very little about something, you feel like you know a lot. And then as you learn more about it, you begin thinking that you don't actually know that much about it. And so they did this whole thing. So you take imposter syndrome plus Dunning-Kruger, and those that are inexperienced will actually be significantly more confident about themselves.
Yeah.
And the better you get at something and the more you know about something and the more you can see and the more you can understand how far you've come, but also the lack and where you need to go, the less confident you become in it because of those two features of like the human psyche. It's just a really interesting combination. So I think Chris Oatley once said that you are never as good or as bad as you think you are. And I think that's a really good place to sit, is like knowing that you're much better than you think you are. And you're not as good as you think you are.
Yeah.
Both of those things are true at the same time. So when you're feeling like really high, know that you've still got some improvement. And when you're feeling really low, know that you're actually doing way better than you think you are.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't really add to that. I mean, I could, but that'll be another,
It's another hour-long conversation. So
what a fun conversation. That's really cool. And it was a cool experience. So, thanks for kind of going through that with me. Uh, yeah, so I think that's pretty much it for the art check. Thank you for everybody who joined us and joined us in the chats and stuff like that. It really makes our conversations much more interesting, and it's fun to see the community build around this. And it definitely helps us both with our imposter syndrome. So yeah. You can check out Cory Kerr's work at corykerr.com/48hr. I'm also just tacking that on if you want to go to our podcast. You can leave us a nice 4-star rating on iTunes, as these will be podcast episodes, and it helps more people kind of check out our work, and it might keep people company on their commute. So give us a nice review while you're up there. And then you can check out my comic at quarterlystories.com, and that'll pretty much do it. So yeah.